The morning my wife came home from her final deployment aboard the USS Truman, the sun hadn't even fully risen. Our little ranch-style home in rural Texas was quiet except for the gravel crunch of her boots on the driveway. She wore her full Navy uniform, freshly pressed, ribbons shining, shoulders back. I hadn't seen her in 6 months. That woman walked like steel wrapped in calm, and I couldn't have been prouder. We barely had 15 minutes together before the drama started. A black Lexus screeched to a halt at the end of our driveway. Out stepped Karen, not just any Karen but the HOA president Karen. Blonde bob, clipboard in one hand, and a phone in the other like it was some kind of badge of power. She looked at my wife, then at me, then back at my wife again, squinting like she'd just spotted a trespasser in enemy territory. She stormed up the drive without even saying hello. "Excuse me," she barked, pointing at my wife. "You can't be here. This is private property, and only residents are allowed on this street." I blinked, trying to process the absurdity. My wife raised an eyebrow and gave me a sideways glance like, "Is this woman serious?" Karen continued, undeterred. "You're not on the approved resident list, and your vehicle doesn't have an HOA sticker. I'm calling the sheriff." And just like that, she whipped out her phone and dialed. My wife stood there in silence for a second. Then she stepped forward, calm and cool, and said, "Ma'am, this is my home. I'm a permanent resident here." Karen scoffed. "Oh really? You've never been seen at any of the HOA meetings. You must be one of those renters or guests. No uniform is going to change the rules here." I watched as my wife slowly pulled a leather ID wallet from her breast pocket and flipped it open. Her military ID gleamed in the light. Karen squinted at it, confused. "That's not a driver's license," she muttered. "No," my wife said. "It's a Department of Defense identification. And I outrank the county sheriff you're about to call." Karen's face froze for a moment as if her brain had to reboot. Then she turned pale. "You can't be serious." "Oh," I said, "she's very serious. She's a commander in the United States Navy. You just tried to evict a warship officer from her own home." Karen looked down at her phone and realized the mistake wasn't about to be fixed with another angry voicemail. And that was just the beginning. "You said." Karen didn't back down right away. People like her never do. The problem with power-hungry HOA types is that they live in a fantasy where clipboards and bylaws make them invincible. But what Karen didn't realize was that reality had just come knocking, wearing navy dress whites. The sheriff showed up 15 minutes later, lights off but attitude fully loaded. He stepped out of his cruiser, adjusted his belt, and looked between me, my wife, and Karen, who had planted herself on our front lawn like she owned the place. "Morning," he said. "Got a call about a trespasser?" Karen immediately pointed at my wife. "That's her. She doesn't belong here. No HOA decal, no prior registration, and she's impersonating military personnel." My wife didn't flinch. She stepped forward and calmly handed the sheriff her ID. He looked at it. Then he looked up at her name. Then he looked way up at her rank. There was a full 5 seconds of silence before he cleared his throat and stood at attention, not figuratively, literally. Hands behind his back, feet together, spine straight. "Commander, I wasn't aware you were the resident in question." Karen's jaw practically unhinged. My wife nodded. "At ease, deputy." "Yes, ma'am." Karen blinked. "Wait, what? You're actually—" "Commander Natalie Kahn, U.S. Navy. Homeowner. Veteran. Married to him," she said, jerking her thumb at me. "Been deployed for the last 6 months." Karen tried to pivot. "Okay, well, the vehicle still doesn't have a decal. You understand we have rules?" The sheriff cut in before my wife could even open her mouth. "Ma'am, the commander doesn't need an HOA decal. This is her property. The HOA has no jurisdiction over federal officers or their rights as homeowners under state and federal law." Karen stuttered, grasping for whatever control she thought she still had. "Well, we'll see about that. I'm filing a formal complaint." "Go ahead," my wife said. "But you'll need to include this too." She handed Karen a certified letter, one she'd brought back from the base. Karen opened it, confused. Inside was a formal cease and desist notice, signed by a Navy legal representative, addressing previous HOA harassment complaints lodged against our address, including 3 from before my wife had even returned. Karen's face went white. Her little kingdom was crumbling fast. That night, while the neighborhood buzzed with gossip, I grilled steaks in the backyard while Natalie cleaned her boots. We didn't have to say it out loud, the war wasn't over yet. But the first battle? We'd won that in full dress uniform. "You said." The next morning the neighborhood was buzzing like a kicked beehive. Word had spread fast. The mysterious woman Karen tried to evict was not only a resident, but a Navy commander who outranked the sheriff. HOA group chats were in full meltdown mode. Some folks were siding with Karen, others were backpedaling hard, pretending they'd always been supportive. Meanwhile, my wife? Calm as ever. She'd spent the morning washing her car, humming softly while Karen practically peered through her blinds across the street like a nosy cartoon villain. But Natalie wasn't done. While I made coffee, she laid out a neat file on the kitchen table and said, "Time to clean house." Inside were records she'd started gathering months ago, even while on deployment. Karen's history with the HOA was longer than I realized. Dozens of complaints, multiple instances of harassment, misuse of HOA funds for personal landscaping, and even a backdoor deal with a local towing company to profit off of ticketing residents. Natalie had contacts in JAG and civilian legal circles. She'd requested info months back under FOIA. She had receipts. All of them. And the best part? She knew how to use them. That afternoon, Natalie requested a formal audit of the HOA. Not a polite suggestion, a certified request through the county. She also contacted several homeowners Karen had harassed, encouraging them to file complaints together. Turns out, people just needed a little courage and someone to lead the charge. And who better than a Navy commander with a spine of steel? Karen, of course, retaliated. She emailed the board accusing Natalie of intimidation, stolen valor, and disrupting neighborhood harmony. She even tried to fine us $1,000 for unauthorized military presence. That backfired immediately. The county legal office issued Karen a warning about impersonating law enforcement procedures and attempting to override federal protections. Then came the real twist. During the audit request process, one of the junior board members, a guy named Marco who'd always looked nervous at meetings, reached out privately. He was ready to talk. Said he'd seen Karen forge signatures, alter minutes, and push through rule changes without votes. He sent us copies of texts, emails, even a voice memo. By dinner that night, my wife had drafted a formal misconduct petition. She wasn't doing this for revenge. She was doing it for accountability. For the homeowners. For the truth. I looked at her while she reviewed the final draft. There was no anger in her eyes, no gloating. Just focus. Precision. Karen had declared war on the wrong household. And the commander? She was just getting started. Ask ChatGPT. The emergency HOA meeting was held in the community center on a stormy Thursday evening. Chairs were filled, voices low, tension thick. Everyone was waiting for a showdown, but what they got was a masterclass in composure and authority. Natalie walked in wearing a clean civilian blazer over a navy blue shirt. Nothing flashy. No medals. Just confidence and presence that turned heads the moment she stepped in. I walked beside her, carrying a folder of evidence thick enough to bring down a mayor, let alone a petty HOA president. Karen stood at the front, arms crossed, already sweating. She tried to keep the room under control, but the whispers were growing louder. People had heard about the audit. They'd seen the documents circulating privately. And now, thanks to Marco and Natalie's efforts, they knew the truth. Natalie stepped up, nodded politely to the board, and asked to address the room. Many of you don't know me. That's because I've spent most of the past few years overseas, serving on the USS Truman, she began. But this is my home. And I've returned to find it under the thumb of a president who's abused power, intimidated residents, and violated state law. Yes. A few people clapped. Karen tried to interrupt, but Natalie didn't even look her way. She handed out copies of her findings. Unauthorized expenses, tampered meeting records, illegal fines, and even forged signatures on board decisions. Then she motioned to Marco, who stood up nervously and confirmed everything. His voice was shaky, but his words were strong. When Natalie played a voice memo of Karen threatening to kick out anyone who didn't fall in line, the room turned completely. Karen shouted, tried to regain control, but it was too late. The county representative, who had been quietly watching from the back, stood up. Based on the complaints, the evidence, and community testimony, we're suspending the current HOA leadership effective immediately, pending a full investigation. Elections will be held in 30 days. Karen went pale. Her power was gone in an instant. Some neighbors cheered. Some just sat stunned. But everyone knew one thing: the reign of fear was over. As we walked home, the clouds had cleared. Natalie didn't say much. She didn't need to. The next morning, HOA signs were removed from our mailbox. The ridiculous military presence fine was officially withdrawn. And a new respect filled the neighborhood, not just for Natalie but for the truth. Karen eventually sold her house and left quietly. She never apologized. But the neighborhood changed. The HOA became transparent, the meetings civil, and for the first time in years the community actually felt like one. Natalie never asked for credit. She just watered the garden, walked our dog, and went about her day like nothing had happened. But every time someone walked by and nodded with a little more respect than before, I knew they hadn't just met their neighbor. They'd met the commander. You said,